So good morning, everybody. You are very welcome to our third IS seminar series. Some of you have been here before, so you know the format, but again, there's some new faces and a new speaker as well. So I just wanted to give you a backdrop again about the motivation of the IS seminar series. As you can see, it's not just dedicated to one discipline, okay? We have lots of presenters coming in from other universities in Ireland and overseas. Lero very much involved, as our BIS. If you have any questions or feedback on how to improve the seminar, please send us an email. The housekeeping rules are usually, again, first of all, the purpose of the seminar series is really to drive home how we can actually improve our outputs at high-end conferences and publications. And also to highlight the challenges that people encounter in their research, whether you're a research assistant, PhD candidate, postdoc, experienced, academic. We all have challenges. So that's really to break the isolation from your own research and actually start building a group that we can actually work out together and support together. Feedback is always welcome. Usual housekeeping is, that our guest speaker, presenting in a minute, is going to present his talk for 20 minutes. We're going to look at his problem or challenges. Then we'll 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and have a guided discussion. So that's basically it. Introduction, topic presentation, open discussion, break, guided discussion, round up, and takeaway. So on that, I'm going to hand you over to a good colleague of mine, Dr. Rob Gleasure from UCC. Myself and Rob shared a PhD lab for 3 years, so we know each other well. And we've had many coffees about design science as well. And I suppose that's just an example of how you can leverage the peer support from your own PhDs rather than depending on your supervisor always for a solution, actually to brainstorm with your own colleagues as well. So on that, I'd like to welcome Rob. Thanks, Rob.
So, thank you. Okay. When we were chatting about maybe coming up and having a talk and figuring out what to cover, there were a couple of different things that we could have gone with. I went with this idea of trying to figure out how to basically balance the theory building side and the practical side of being involved in a commercial project. And it's kind of, in a way, it's a strange thing to get up and talk about because I don't really have that many answers. But I feel comfortable with that because I don't think any of us have that many answers yet. I think actually trying to figure out how to be involved in commercial projects as a researcher and make the whole thing work so that everyone gets what they want it's an ongoing challenge, to say the least. Also, I think because we're like public institutions, we're under more pressure to get external funding and we're under more pressure for engagement and all of this sort of stuff. It seems like a problem that's going to get bigger rather than smaller. So it seemed like an interesting one, as I said, to come up and have a bit of a chat about it. Basically, so we have like 20 minutes for the talk and then half an hour afterwards. I don't really, if you want to jump in at any point, there's no reason why it has to be 20 minutes talk and then 30 minutes discussion. So if there's anything as we go along that you want to talk about, please do. It would be fantastic. The other thing as well is that I'm coming from an IS background, so there are certain things that are kind of familiar to me that I forget are terms that not everyone uses or anything else. So if that happens, please just jump in and say, what are you talking about, okay? Okay, so there's sort of four issues that I have found from personal experience and also that I think other people they commonly come up in conversation. And I think the first and probably most obvious one is, so we go out and we work with a company or we do something and we want to try and build some theory from it. We're shooting at different targets. We always are. Even if we agree and we say, I want to go research this thing, and they say, that's great, you can do it as part of this project and you'll take over this part of it for us, and typically you're lowering cost for them or they're getting some sort of value out of it, and that's great. But often what happens is you end up doing an awful lot for the sake of a study. Like if you go out and you do a case study and you go speak with people, there's a lot of work involved in that. To actually go off and help people build the thing, or help people do something, or actually help people solve problems, and then go do all the other stuff as well. It's just extra effort. And I think that's one of the reasons why today some people are nervous about doing PhDs with things like design science, things like action research, things where you're not just watching problems unfold, you're actually trying to get involved, because there's this extra step involved. And the best solution, the best rule of thumb that I've been able to come up with this is that when you're choosing a project, when you're choosing someone to work with, the worst thing you can do is have just one place where you're going to get your interesting research value out of them. And I kind of been, stung is a strong word, but it's happened to me a couple of times where you go up, somebody has a problem, and you say, I'll get involved in this particular bit, solve that, do my research stuff I have to do. That's all going well and good. You get to that problem, solve it, and now you kind of want everyone to stop to do your research part. But from their point of view, you've just picked up some momentum, right? You've just solved something, so, well, okay, yeah, sure, no, that's definitely going on the to-do list, but not towards the top of it. And again, you can understand it. I mean, people have real-world problems, and a lot of the time I think they don't understand that this is where you're getting more or less all of your value if you pitch it in this way. Like I said, it's happened in things like business process modeling, gone in and said, yeah, no, I'll do that for you. And often they'll pay for it, or they'll pay for a project or something else, great. There's this particular part we're trying to crack, great. But for them, the output is this set of business processes modeled and all of this different things. So yeah, the stream just keeps moving, and you end up very quickly, you end up in a position where it either doesn't become research, or it's the kind of research that you think, actually, because I haven't been able to follow all the checklists, because I haven't been able to really make this academic, if I'm going to publish it, I'm going to publish it in a journal with modest standards. And is that really worth my while? I mean, I put this effort in, so I probably should publish it, but if I'm going to take all this time to write it up and put it through revision cycles and put it somewhere that, you know, we're talking about world-class problems, aiming high and everything else. And to be honest, it's happened a couple of times where research projects have just turned into commercial projects. The research part just falls away. And that's the truth of it. The other side of it is, if you can find projects that are actually interesting in a load of different ways, when you get dragged around, it's actually not such a big deal. Because if they say, okay, well, we've cracked this, but now this other thing happens, and we've got to figure that out too. So we're not really ready to stop and deal with that in all these ways, or it goes on the to-do list. And you get dragged to something else, and that's also interesting. It's not so bad. You know, there are more places you can kind of get your value out of it as a researcher. And again, that's happened in a couple of places. There was an instance when somebody was building an app, and they had a very specific problem, and they basically said, I don't know if we can go forward with this. What do you think? And I said, I think we have a way of cracking that problem. Great, let's do it, do all this stuff. And I said, okay, I can develop the bit that will represent that problem, and we can go test it. I said, okay. But if we're going to bring that and show it to our potential consumers, I'd like it to look good. Sure, okay, I'll make it look good. A couple more hours, whatever, that's fine. Okay, but I'd like, as we're in there as well, to maybe try out these other things. Okay, of course, yeah, sure, all right. Weeks worth of coding later before you get the things you can actually show them, and it ends up being pretty much a full prototype, because that's the situation you put it in, and you're justifying it along the way because you're saying, well, it is getting more and more realistic, so maybe this is a good thing to do, but all you've really done is just some cheap development at the end of the day. And it's no one's fault. It's not that anyone's set out to do anything wrong. It's just the sort of thing that happens. But again, if you're getting dragged different places that are interesting, that are also researchable, it's not such a problem. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, I would say that with every reason why you would enter a research project in collaboration with someone, there's a chance that that's going to fall away. So the more things there are that are interesting, you're basically lowering the risk. That would be my first, maybe obvious, maybe not, recommendation on it. And it comes down to, again, this point that one of the things we're talking about today is design science. Now, again, I don't know if that's familiar to everyone. Has anyone not come across the term design science before? A couple people? Yeah, all right. Design science basically just means it's not explanatory anymore. We're trying to figure out how to do things. And as part of that, we're actually implementing those changes and seeing if we can get the results that we want. So again, this happens a lot with collaborative projects. There's a strong design science element. And the problem with design science is trying to figure out how it can still be science and how it can still be industrial design and how it can still be design science. And so you're balancing all these different things. So like I said, it's hard to do. If you're aiming at just one target, there's a decent chance it'll fall away. So a couple of different things, you end up with interesting stuff. Another thing as well is that I think the more engaged that you get, we sort of, if you're doing intervention-based or design-based research, there are sort of 4 things that are worth considering. I think there's a 2x2 that not many people talk about, but is actually quite important. One is this idea of how artificial can you make it? So how much can you pull this back to a lab and take things away and really streamline it back? Or how naturalistic does it have to be? How much does this have to happen in context? And the other is it theory first? Or is it we'll solve the problem and then figure out the theory afterwards? We'll reflect on it. And I think the more we get traditional science doing it in the lab, doing it in these basic controlled settings, doing it theory first, a lot of the time it's almost traditional science. In fact, if I'm honest, I know we've had a few studies, and I know a lot of other people have done it before. We've set out to do something as design science, and it's ended up just being framed and presented as traditional science. Because we've said, well, you need to get more A to get more B. So here's us building something to test that. And people have basically just said, yeah, that's basically just a lab experiment. You built something to test it, and you've seen that there's a causal effect between them. So couldn't you just drop all that section, talk about some stuff I want you to talk about? Because they're right, it's so close to it. As we get more towards this naturalistic stuff, as we get more towards this theory after stuff, it gets less and less like traditional science, which is the reason we get more pulled away from these sort of neat scientific model. The other thing, a simple, sorry, all of this is dogs all the way through, just as a warning. A traditional, as you move, especially after your PhD, the unit of work typically becomes a paper. And sometimes there will be conference papers on the way to developing a paper, but a lot of the time you're thinking, here's a thing, and the output for this thing, this piece of work is a paper. And I think those projects where they get more and more complicated and more effort invested in doing all of this different stuff, I think there's a general consensus moving out that if you're going to actually get involved in a commercial project, it's not worth it for a paper. It's just not. You know, why would you go to all of this effort to do all of these things for a paper? So we have to move away from this idea that a project is one paper. Because unless it's a very simple project and unless it's very clearly defined and all this stuff in advance, it's just not worth our while. And actually, there was the editor-in-chief of the top journal in our discipline made a point of this at the recent design-based conference. He said, not only is it not a good return of effort, but it ends up with a very muddy description. It's like, here's a bunch of stuff that happened over 3 years. You know, it's hard to actually fit that in a paper as well. And again, actually, this is something that Kieran and Owen and I wrote a little paper on not that long ago. A lot of the time when we try and make sense of design-based research in a traditional science model, we latch it back to a problem, trying to solve a problem. There's a matrix, you guys might have had a chance to read the Gregor and Hebner paper, that basically says for something to be researched, if you're solving a problem, it has to be a new solution, or sorry, new solution to an old problem, an old solution to a new problem, or a new solution to a new problem. It's all well and good, but as we get closer to the actual coalface, it's not really one problem. One problem makes perfect sense in a lab experiment. In an organization, it's never one problem, right? It's always a huge bunch of problems entangled together. So if you go in and you say, well, this is my study, this one problem, if I can just wriggle my way through there, that one, and then I'm just gonna leave, thanks, see you later, guys. It doesn't always work out that well. So again, I think we need to move away, and I think there's consensus, we need to move away from this idea that one project is one paper. Because especially when we have these, when it's in a commercial project, there's a whole bunch of problems in there, and we can't always pick and choose which ones we're going to deal with and how much. The other thing, why don't you put the dogs? The other thing is, okay, so we have this project that has loads of interesting problems in it that we're involved with, hopefully. Okay. We realize that we're going to have to slice it up in different ways to pull our research out of it. Okay. And how? I think this is a place where a lot of us are falling down. You have this huge, fantastic, intricate, meandering story, and you're saying, all right, but what bits? What's a research-sized chunk? You know, what's a good bit to go in and take out? And I think a big part of the problem here is that we're not really sure what a prescriptive theory looks like. Like, it can be a set of guidelines. Okay, is that a theory? It can be some novel artifact, something that looks different from things that have been built before. Okay, is that a theory? Does it have to link back to explanations and things, or you know, how exactly does it work? And that's basically the third recommendation, is that as we actually really need to think about this, not just do everything, but constantly look at where the parts in this, how are they breaking up? Where are the sort of stage gates a little bit between different parts? And how does this big story break up into chapters a little bit? And sometimes it is stages. I think other times it's the whole story, but a particular take on the whole story, or a particular angle or thread going through it. And this is something that I was trying to put together because I've been trying to explain this to people, and I was trying to make it simple. I'm not sure it's simple, but it's pretty comprehensive. Okay, design theory. Okay. So we have these knowledge flows about different things that we're trying to talk about. A lot of the time, when we're doing observational research, we talk about things out in the world that we can look at, and then we build either process theories or variance theories. Process theories being this phenomenon or this thing, this is kind of how it happens. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And again, usually that's pretty exploratory when we're talking about that. Our variance theories are, we wanted to explain why some outcome occurs. Here's some of the things that seems to contribute to it. Does that make sense? One's very sequence-based. One's very causally based. This thing happens, and that makes this other thing happen. We also have this thing creeping up more and more in our discipline, sort of evolutionary theory. Not evolutionary like biological, but evolutionary like it's not a loop. It's this is how we started here and ended somewhere else. The process theories tend to be, this is the process that happens, and they tend to link back. The co-evolutionary theories are a bit more, they don't look back, and they're kind of harder to apply. They're a little bit more narrative driven, if that makes sense. We want to see how things got diffused into an organization or something else. So we just sort of follow the story a little bit. Does that make sense? Sort of rough types of theory. As we move into trying to make sense of what we're talking about with our design theories, it's kind of the same thing. We kind of sometimes, we build things and we say, I think this thing is quite a good archetype, quite a good model for other things. We tried to give it this characteristics and it seemed to produce some stuff we wanted. We gave it this other characteristic and that was a disaster. All right, so don't do that. And this sort of same idea, looking at a system as a model, as a thing, and saying more of this tends to make more of that. You know, fewer click-throughs tends to make higher perceived ease of use. You know, more rounded edges and soft colors tends to make people more relaxed using it. You know, these sorts of things that you might have. The other thing that we have that I think is less popular, but I'm not sure why, is we tend to have design methods which basically say, not this is the artifact or an archetype for something, but this is the process that we did when we made something, and it worked pretty well. And again, these things will tend to have different activities laid out in some sequence, and they'll typically have some sort of inputs and things that you'll take. And I think the inputs is where sometimes the line blurs between the two. So when we have those, then we typically try and instantiate them, build something that represents them, and then watch it work or not work. Does that make sense? It's sort of a journey. Okay, so an interesting thing, I think, when you try and take this, what looks like a pretty elaborate view of what's going on, I've actually found it very helpful to make sense of projects. For example, there are a few where the first thing that's had to happen, like we had one, again, more recently there's some work with medical devices where people want to monitor heart rate to look for signs of symptoms of conditions. But before anyone even started building it, everyone kind of took a step back and said, yeah, but there are a lot of reasons your heart rate goes up. A lot of reasons. There are behavioral reasons. You could have just ran up the stairs before you take a measure. You could be just stressed. You might even be stressed by the fact that you put a heart rate monitor on you. It's like the white coat syndrome, taken home. So before we even start building that, we really got to figure out, well, if we're going to build something to use heart rate to measure symptoms for these other things, what is impacting on these other, like the stressors of different types, and how might we be able to monitor those? And is it that, for example, if there's psychosocial stress, can we increase anonymity or just give people a better idea as to who's there to lower that? Or if it's just the fact that it's on people and that's annoying them, can we make it less visible or less loud or whatever else, and these sorts of things to do all of this stuff. But before ever starting to build a thing, there's like a study there. So it's a very easy one to say, this project, that's probably going to be a study-sized chunk in and of itself, and it's worth doing it right, and it'll inform everything else. Again, there was another one for wellness management where we had to, basically, we were going to try and build an app to do a bunch of stuff to help people, but we really had to figure out what they were doing first. So same thing, sort of a chunk in and of itself. Does that make sense? So I think that's quite a neat one. More recently, I'm working with a couple of the guys down in UCC to help them, to be honest, they built it, and I'm just coming in to help them write it up and sort of figure out what went on from a theoretical perspective, reflectively, which is totally credible, but you've just got to do it right. And one of the things they did is they built this, there's a business model canvas, which basically says this is a way to think about your business, your customers, your value proposition, your revenue streams, all these different things. They built something that goes out to a corpus of text, and you enter a company's name, and it populates it automatically. It says, for that company, here's who their customers are, here's some sentiment analyses, tweets and things about them. Within that, here are basically all the different bits. Useful thing, and they've got real strong commercial potential around it. But in trying to make sense of that, it turns out what they actually did to create the corpus of text, that they didn't really, well, they did think about, but that isn't necessarily at the front of that conversation, is they decided, because it's for the financial services, very specialized audience, that they weren't just going to use all of this stuff on Google because it's too big to go over it in any detail. And also, it's relevance based on lots of people who aren't specialists might think something is relevant, but specialists wouldn't. If that makes sense. There are different things they want to think about. So they actually created a corpus of like 850,000 documents and basically said, well, but we can give this a really good rinse with different algorithms to see what comes out. Which was interesting because it's underlying the actual artifact itself, but it was a method. It was a different whole argument that said, in building something for people with specialist knowledge, sometimes it's not about big data. It's about a good, solid set of data that you can analyze more thoroughly to create more, to look a bit deeper into. Does that make sense? And again, they tested it, and it's true, it works. The people ran generic queries on it, worked very well, so they built it into the other thing. But it's an example of basically, it's a very neat way of saying, that was sort of how you built it, and this is what you did. And they're kind of different. Or at the very least, you can build, there is theory to be taken out of one part that can inform people for some set of problems, theory to be taken out of something else that can inform other people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? So, I suppose as much as anything else, it's like we talked a lot, like, a couple of you mentioned that you read some of the stuff that went out for this talk, and it was hard going in places, right? But it's the reason for it is that actually the design process and the intervention process and actually working with people is such a, it's so complicated and so parallel that to actually make sense of what happened, you kind of need to put on you need to put on some pretty fine-grained glasses. Right, so this is just something, again, and I'd love to hear feedback, I'd love to hear ideas, to break it. I should also say as well, there's sort of a layer here in between about design principles, because I think that's what happens a lot of the times. People actually, from some artifact, from something they build out in the world, they're not necessarily able to create a complete model or a complete method for it. It's more bits of that, just chunks of things, takeaways. And I think a lot of the time we deal in design principles down here. Okay. Does that actually make sense? Okay, we'll come back to the chat about it. The fourth thing, and this is a little bit of a This is a little bit of a caution as much as anything else. There are times in design projects where there have been very interesting problems, and we've cracked them quite effectively, and cracked them quite quickly, and just moved on, and haven't had a chance to reflect back on what happened for a while. And by that time, well, the things we've been building have changed, so it's very hard to roll it back to somewhere else to test it and to go through all the checks and balances there. Also, a lot of the time you're working with people who've seen everything that comes afterwards, so you can't just ask them to forget everything and come back. And I think there's this challenge that happens where if you want to say something scientific, there are basically two ways you can say it. You can say, we built it scientifically. Very theoretically, everything was done according to a process, and that process made so much sense. Or we just tested the pants off it, and it definitely works. I mean, that's basically what you're trying to say. You're trying to say either this thing works, I can be really confident it works, or else it makes so much sense to build this thing. It was just, we followed everything we should have done, build it, and there are signs it works. But the burden of science has to come in somewhere, right? And I think in the very deductive, artificial ones, you can actually push quite a lot here, and your evaluations could be quite neat and everything else. I think what everyone is finding is that when it's something done in a commercial situation, it's quite hard to make this scientific because there's just too much going on. It's very hard to just pull a couple of things out and say, these were the decisions we made because of whatever else, because the reality is that the decisions everyone was making were changing and trying to find some sort of settled configuration all the time. And you can pull some science out of that, but not to the same extent. It's messy. So we have to have this solid evaluation. And I think if we don't think about why it was science until quite late on, a lot of the time it's just too late. You can't go back over it. It's plugged and it's done. You know, they can't unsee what came next. Sometimes that version of the artifact's just gone as well, which shouldn't happen, but does. So yeah, those are basically 4 things as a starting point. And as I say, I don't pretend to know anything about, or to know everything about this because, but I feel comfortable in that because I don't think anyone does. But sort of 4 things. One is, if we're going to engage in projects, they have to be interesting in a lot of different ways, because our opportunities to make something scientific can shrink. And if we only have one personal experience, as a lot of the time it just becomes a cheap consultancy. The next one is we have to get away from the idea that one project is one paper, because it's not worth our while. It's too much effort for one paper. There's just too big an opportunity cost. The third one is that when we're slicing up a project to figure out where individual studies, where individual papers are, we need to be able to make some sense as to this is where we stop. This is why it's this part, and this is why some other part of the project is different. And like I say, sometimes there can be a theme running throughout. My experience is that more often than not, it's just recognizing when something happens that this is the end of a stage, and we need to bound and put a wrapper on this stage, or else we lose the value. And the fourth one kind of follows on from that, which says a lot of the time, when you realize it's the end of a stage, you need to gather data, and you need to be quite assertive, I think, in doing that. And again, there's a lot of give and take and all these sorts of things, but if you don't, I think it's very hard to take this, it's very hard to pull high quality research out of a project. Okay, what do you think?
So we'll throw it over to the floor. Is anyone?
Just a question, I know very little about design science, but you're saying that, you know, if you're just concentrating on one paper.
Yeah.
What about the likes of PhD students?
Yeah, and it's, like, it's an interesting one. So,
Is it
I think it can be. It probably depends on, so there are a couple of things. was having this conversation recently with people about qualitative research, where they were saying that, you know, with a good qual study, you can't say that it's just going to be one paper. You'll come back and you'll revisit the data and cut it up in different ways. And I actually completely disagree. I think if you want to do good research and you keep going back to the same data, each paper is worse than the one that came before it. And I think you might as well just do a new study, you know, rather than saying, I pulled all the interesting stuff out of this data, but maybe there's something I can argue as a contribution in here. You know, it's just not a good, I don't think it's good practice. So from that sense, I'm contradicting myself by saying design science should be cut up. And from the point of view of a PhD, it's dangerous to try and, it's dangerous for people who need, let me pitch that a little bit differently. You guys aren't moving to publication-based or paper-based theses up here, are you? Or have you talked about them?
Yeah, it's an option. Yeah.
It's an option. So down in UCC, it's coming through now as a stronger option. There is a limitation that it has to be 4 papers and maximum, so it can be more than that, but at least that, maximum 1 of those papers has to not be data-based. So you can only have one that's methodological or philosophical or theory building or whatever else. So I think in that model, actually, design science might be a pretty good way of doing it, because if you have these stages, you almost tick them off. In the traditional model, like I did a design science PhD, I found it really hard to write up. Really hard to write up. It took me a long time. Just because trying to make it fit that structure was kind of a mess. And my one got more and more deductive, more and more lab-based, just to try and make it fit into that. So I would say it probably depends on the style of PhD that you want to do. If you want to do a paper-based thesis, I actually think it makes doing a design science one would make total sense. Or if you and your supervisors can agree on a paper-based like structure to your PhD as well, then because that was what we kind of ended up doing for mine as well, was each chapter was more or less a paper. But it's a good question. Like a lot of people who are very, very knowledgeable in design science and in action research would say that trying to do a real industry-immersed PhD is, I'm not going to say shouldn't do it, but it's challenging. It wouldn't be for everyone, I think.
I think one of the big challenges, Rob, is actually what you said there about trying to agree with your supervisors. Because my experience has been that quite often there's this generic straight chapter of 6-chapter PhD.
Sure.
And if it doesn't fit into that, well, then it's not really a PhD. Where I've seen PhDs that are actually 8, 9 chapters.
Yeah, sure. And again, I guess it just depends on trying to make sure that, because like PhD, obviously, you're trying to manage some risk as well. And I think the supervisors, it's a big part of that from a supervisory perspective, is trying to manage the risk. So I think you can understand why people want you to do the type of PhD that gets through. So again, it depends on.
Or you can end up falling between 2 students.
A little bit.
Because you're trying to write design science and you're trying to write traditional PhD. You know, so that is a challenge.
Yeah, but again, it's probably a challenge that's becoming less meaningful as time goes on, because more and more people are doing different kinds of stuff. Yeah. So I think the PhDs, certainly the PhDs I've seen come through, are less homogenous than they were previously. There's more scope for, maybe that should be a chapter on its own. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Hey.
Thanks, Rob. Just a quick question for you. I suppose it's a challenge. It's almost like, I use the term around where I'm discussing about the dating game. Industry is on one side of the ballroom and you're on the other side.
Sure.
And I suppose the quest to be the pracademic and practical academics. But from the 4 quadrants, and I suppose it's something I always had a problem trying to rationalize. The inductive, deductive, and the naturalistic and the artificial. Is there a sweet spot in the scale of the quadrants that you should be moving towards? I know there's a tendency to live in the top left.
Well, you see, I think again, it depends. Like, it depends how you're slicing it up. Some things you can be quite deductive going in, and you can say, I think this is a problem, and it's a really good entry point, and you can carve things out. The odds are when you get there and you do it, you're going to see some other stuff you probably should have done instead, or should do as well. So I think one project wouldn't necessarily live in just one place in this. I think even as well, like when you go out and you do things for commercial projects, a lot of the time there are things you want to sandpick pretty carefully, and they end up being quite artificial studies, quite almost laboratory-like as well. So I don't know, I would say, for me, this is the most design science. Yeah. This is this is where it starts to blur in, like the previous, was it the previous slide I put? Like I think in terms of commercial design and observational research, I think the artificial deductive stuff pushes you back this side a little bit more. So you end up having to work harder to justify the relevance and justify that it is design science and everything else. I think if you go further towards that bottom right, you end up having to work harder to justify that it's science. If that makes sense?
You know, that does, I suppose the challenge of getting that balance, to try to get it into that zone.
Yeah, like I think in a way, like it depends on your background too. If you're really comfortable in industry, if you're coming from industry and you know an awful lot in there, then I think doing the design part well, the commercial design part well, is probably going to be reasonably straightforward. So I think in a way, leveraging your strength by gravitating towards that, working with people and pulling the theory out and learning how to pull the theory out with your colleagues and your supervisors and everything else makes a lot of sense. I think if you were coming straight out of an undergrad master's and into a PhD, for example, it might be a good idea to not add that and to leverage the skills that you have, which is probably pretty good habits of abstract thinking, land in that, or angle more for that top left corner, of course.
Yeah, I think actually the preface of that paper is actually good one to look at, because there's a nice process model of design science research, but also the different entry points where you can actually go in to the problem.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about that, it's a nice process model in a lot of ways. So one of the authors on that, Samuel Chatterjee, really nice fella, but he comes from a computer science background, and he was making the argument repeatedly a lot at conferences and things that I think the point he makes is if you look at the top 10 computer science journal papers ever, they don't really talk about theory. They're just a really cool project. They did a lot of creative stuff and got some good outputs. It's very much an instantiation level. And I think that process model has that sort of bias built in a little bit. It's what did you do and what happened and what next. I don't actually think there's a strong theory base at all behind it. In terms of actually relating that to an IS community, like it's easy to do, I say easy. Computer scientists are interested in building things very much, so it makes sense that their top journal papers are about how they built something. I think, for example, in our discipline, maybe it's not necessarily the same in a lot of other ones for people here, theory is a big thing. So a process model like that doesn't necessarily encourage you to make the step to make the step to push it back here a little bit. It kind of leads you to think you're quite comfortable here, and I'm not sure. Like apparently in the top journals, it's got like 1,700 citations. In our basket of 8 top journals, since it came out in 2007, it's been used 8 times. Which is a lot. So that's 1,692 people talking about what a good idea it would be to use it. 8 people using it. And again, that's a bit cynical. It's a good paper, but it's just, it's capturing that problem that, yeah, it's not. You're trying to live in the space where everyone gets something from it. And again, it's, I'm not sure that we've all figured out how to do that well yet. But the plus side I would say as well, because in coming up, I suppose this is about a problem. So I'm being a little bit pessimistic because it's a problem, you know, or a little critical of it. But I would say as well, like I think there is both a push for more of this type of research that actually takes place in industry rather than by people perceived to be living in an ivory tower detached from reality. I would say there's certainly much more design-oriented research being called for, and I actually think people, even people doing observational research, are getting away with less and less in terms of separation from industry as well. So it's probably, it depends on the curve as much as anything else.
I think some of your pointers are very relevant, probably as a postdoc as well, when you engage with companies. Even last week I was with a company, I had a list of 5 things that's priority to them. But when you look at our research, so the works, you know, really, some fit, but not really to sort of manage that expectation as well.
Yeah.
Rob, one interesting aspect or one value from the design science approach, there is, I think it's fair to say, but it's a critical or chronic problem in terms of research that adds value to industry. And to be honest, the vast majority, huge percentage of IS researchers don't really add value There's two very different languages, two very different worlds in terms of expectations. It's incredible how vast that chasm is.
Yeah.
And if you can breach it, it's incredibly lucrative because so few can do it. One of the really good things to crack it is to have a common language or something that people can meet in the middle.
Yeah.
To what extent do you think, if you have a PhD student engaged in an industry project, do you think the design science process, whether it's a Peppers or some other model, to what extent do you think that really adds, or maybe in some ways inhibits that chasm?
So it was interesting. I was giving an exec ed class on last Friday, and it was interesting how I think people who are working within an industry, kicking up to abstract problems within that industry is actually often quite challenging because they're so immersed with things. Kicking up to abstract problem solving for designing things in general, I think is it's a process that they need to suspend disbelief if they're really going to come on that journey with you, I think, a little bit. So I think if you talk about, for example, if you were to present like that model to them, they'd just be like, I don't know that we're anywhere near the same page. So I think if, like I say, if you're coming from an industry where you know how to talk to people and you understand how they see things, and you can take each of these new concepts and relate them to them very carefully and in the right level of timing and everything else to ensure, I think coming out of, again, if you're 23 and you're coming out of maybe a master's and coming out of an undergrad and a master's and going in with this vocabulary and expecting that vocabulary to just work, I haven't seen that. I've never seen it to be the case. Where you can even design, we talk about design as being making things. An awful lot of people, and I got this before, you use design and they're like, wait, like you mean art, right? You know, because it's just a different setting to the word. So I would say and I think as well, I can say that I think this is the consensus for the most part. I think the design science vocabulary is the vocabulary you use to communicate with the academic community. I think when you're communicating with the actual commercial people, you just try and talk to them in their language as best you can. With a few people from engineering, right? Yeah, do you guys talk about design science? Not really. Did anyone? Who isn't from IS here? Couple of people. Yeah. Have you guys come across it before at all? Is it a concept?
Here's the term. Really appreciate.
I think in our setting, like as Kieran said, for a long time people were doing fantastic research that no one read. And I think there's a push more and more to do research that actually you could give to a practitioner and they would find some value in. And it seems to be that once it started happening, I think even giving things to journals and stuff now, it seems to be, maybe I'm mistaken here, it's more of a priority now than it would have been a couple of years ago. Is that a fair point to make?
Personally, I wouldn't have thought so.
You wouldn't have thought so?
No, I think everyone talks, we need to be doing more practical stuff. Everyone in the whole IS community is talking about that,
Yeah, sure.
But the journal editors, like we'll say ISR, MSQ, JIS, have they changed the structure or approach or practical value of those changed over the last 2 or 3 years? And the ones coming through the process at the moment, so I wouldn't have thought there's any improvement on it, but there's certainly huge attention on we should be doing more. And what would happen would CIOs care if MISQ and ISR were destroyed tomorrow?
Yeah.
So those questions have been asked definitely.
Yeah, because it seems to me that the conversation is getting louder in our discipline, certainly, and part of it is because we're relying more and more on external funding, so you actually have to go back with something with value. I suspect if it's coming through, because we're very business focused, I suspect areas that are maybe, again, a level behind, or a level further away from actual industrial practice, I suspect if it's swelling here, it's just going to ripple outwards a little bit more, yeah. Yeah, no, I'm just curious.
So which of the two masters did you aim to serve if you're starting off with PhD? And we just find the bias in either. You have to satisfy your academic
well, I mean,
assessors. So if you go out on the limb with an academic or with a practical project.
For me, if somebody asked me to take part in a project and I couldn't see an angle, at least one, I would treat it as consultancy. And if it turns out to have a research part, great. But I think, and that way you know exactly who your master is, and if you want to, add extra effort to do other things as well, you know where you are. I think going out to work with someone, particularly I think if they've paid anything, whether it's an Enterprise Ireland voucher, whether it's back to project, or whether they're giving you some money for your time, I think their assumption is that they are your master. I think it's, once someone is paying you to do something, they might be paying you less because you want to get a research kick out of it, but I think my experience is a little bit that it's hard to say, okay, no, but I don't want the project to go this way because of my research. Maybe I need to be more assertive. I've never had that work. So I would say, once you know what your take is, once you're clear with that, I think you have to be your own master as regards that. I think anything else, as I say, if it's interesting, follow them around. You come across other things. The other thing with this idea that one project isn't one paper is you do find a lot of things where you did something as part of a project that turned out to be interesting. You weren't sure how it was going to be useful, and then down the line you're like trying to find cases to back up a point, and you can use that as sort of a little module of data to plug into things as well. But yeah, I suppose my experience has been that typically if you're working in a commercial project, they own the project. So they are the master of the direction it's going to go. So if you're trying to share resources to do something else, this is kind of a cynical view on working with commercial people. Again, it's not the people, it's just that a project, a lot of the time they're under pressure, there are budget things, everything else. There's a big long list of things to do. And the researchers want to do something isn't always at the front of their agenda. Something's wrong or something needs to be addressed or whatever. We'll do that and we'll come back to this. We'll do that more. It fades away. So, yeah, it's, like I said, the best answer I can give to that is have a lot of different areas where you can get value out of it and expect to be dragged around a little bit. But yeah, as I said, maybe I just need to be more assertive. What do you say? Has anyone else found differently?
Well, I think like we had a sprint meeting this morning on that topic came up.
Yeah.
Lots of companies want to work with us, but where does it fit into the research?
Yeah.
Or our objectives?
Yeah, and I think it's, like I say, it's making sure that there are big enough chunks that suit you both, and there are multiple ones. Your sprint meeting this morning, so there was a couple of issues as to where commercial stuff actually overlapped, was there?
Just think.
We've no issues.
No issues there.
No issues.
All good. Rob Gleasure chapter. No, I think it's just a matter of, we'd say, like for our group, you think of what's a metrics for a world-class group. Our Horizon 2020 successes, 4-star journal papers, as well as obviously completed PhDs and all of those things. But then when you look at dovetailing that in with industry, the world-class metrics on that side, like so, for example, when we're evaluated by SFI, it's not a nice, soft, cuddly case study that is valued. When they measure, when SFI look at us for measures, they want to see what the company got in terms of increased productivity, how much extra revenue did they get, how many Irish jobs were created as a result of the work. So on both of those sides, there are two bloody difficult metrics to achieve on their own.
Yeah.
But when you combine them, it's a lethal combination. To be honest, it's very difficult to balance.
Yeah, and it's like
Pick the
again,
right project.
and picking the right projects, but also again, there are a few people with whom I've discussed who have walked away from things that looked great because they just said there's something good in here, but as you actually start, that might be a wonderful thing to be able to get out of this. But actually doing all of that is going to take years and years and all these different things, and it's just not a smart return on effort. So yeah, it's a challenge. Like I suppose the only thing is when you're under pressure for industry-focused metrics, at least you are getting some when you get dragged around to places that maybe aren't that interesting. At least you can go, oh, well, no, at least it'll help with that other thing.
It's great for an industry PhD though.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it makes sense for them to kind of go down that road. They're working in there and
Oh,
do
yeah.
a PhD in there.
And it makes sense because people coming from that background have so much knowledge and so much access and so many benefits to leverage. It absolutely does. But again, I think probably for those people, even putting on their scholar cap every now and again and saying, okay, but we just did something really cool there. And I know we did it so well that everyone just wants to forget about it because it's done and there's something else to be done. But to actually stop and say, okay, but let's make that, let's do the checks and balances, let's freeze what we're doing a little bit here, or let me go off and grab some people and do some things and gather some data and talk to some people and do some other stuff. Because, you know, a lot of the time it is just a tangent and meeting back with people and stuff. How many people here are doing industry-based PhDs?
I think I am. Terrifying me, you are.
No, it's not. But it's not even, like, again, you're getting all of these benefits because you're solving problems for people, so you know it's useful.
Well, I might be a bit simplistic, probably am, but I thought what it involved was that you gather information, and then, I've talked to kind of a quantitative sort of measure that would, I thought, similar to the masters, I know anyway, I developed something that was relevant, appropriate, and then distributed that to a huge range of industry in a particular field,
Sure.
a huge number, and that, so I thought, and then I'd get this quantitative feedback that would be relevant once to make sure I ask more questions. But so how are you getting dragged off here, there, and everywhere? That bit I don't understand.
So is that you're working on your own and then sampling industry? You're sending it out to industry?
Yes.
No, we're talking here about projects that are actually undertaken with industrial partners.
Like,
So people put money into these projects. So people try and work with it. Didn't make that clear from the off, did I? Jump right in. Sorry, as I mentioned, this is part of the coming from the background where things are so.
is that better to do than?
Well, it's non-optional. Often it's a way of getting funded. For example, for your PhD, you're getting a project funded or just making the financial realities of the thing work. But it also gives you these benefits where, as you say, you're not guessing what's relevant and then going off and testing things with people. They're telling you the problems that they want solved. And then together you're traveling this journey where they're trying to get to practical goals and you're trying to reach theoretical goals while helping them get there as well. So that you can pull something out and say, okay, but here's some useful stuff for other people to take out as well.
I think a lot of your points are very relevant to some research that Neil and Trevor are working on at the moment too. That they're really cautious that they might get pulled everywhere. Yeah. What do you think, Trevor? Or Neil?
When did Neil take that one? Well, I think it goes back to scope management and requirements, so we'll be quite clear in that. So whenever we talk about masters, I kind of look at it, obviously the piece of work, both from an academic point of view and from the company point of view. So my job as a research assistant is to find the academic with Trevor and Dennis, so I don't take on too much. And equally to find the company with so I've kind of got 2 masters and doing my own PhD to complete as well. So it's scope management.
Yeah, but it really does help if there's a lot of interesting stuff in or around the boundaries of that scope as well. It kind of makes the whole relationship a lot more amicable.
Thankfully there is.
And sorry, Rob, just on the project Save for an Innovation voucher, that scope you mapped out and agree with the party.
Yeah.
Is that put on the wall and if the party comes along and says, I want to do a bit extra, you say, no, we agree on this?
Well, so in my experience, understanding or misunderstandings happen because of vagueness, not because somebody just changes their mind. I think few people just want to do a number on people around them, and it's thankfully not that common. So I think my experience has been again that if you're pretty clear up front that it's okay, then it's fine. The problem is more that there are times when you're kind of saying, like I said, when you want to go off on a tangent in a project, or you want to grab people and talk to them, and they're like, well, those people are busy. We're already 2 weeks over, and I'm not sure that,
So does anyone have any more questions for Rob? No? Perfect. So we'll take a break for 10, 15 minutes. Perfect. Thanks, Rob. We're going to come back to the second half, or the last 30 minutes really of the seminar. I hope somebody has read the paper or papers. Maybe it's a good question to ask, but might be disappointed, so I won't ask who's read the papers. One of the questions I think everybody can contribute to would be, I know you can't see it here, okay, and it comes through in this literature as well. Is this the challenge? Now maybe you have your own views, okay? If we go back to the original paper of Avison, they talked about theory light and this role in publications. And since then, there's been ongoing debate. And I suppose, particularly this paper actually resonated very much with what Jed said in the very first seminar, the role of big data. And they make reference to big data in this as well. You know, that there's an argument at the moment that you don't need theory. The data is there in the big data, and that's what to make sense from. I suppose you're saying, oh, it's just trying to be controversial. But I suppose when Jed first mentioned about big data, and this is another option, we could have said he's really left field, he's way out there, you know. But actually, when you see it's being brought in here as another argument that, you know, there is something in it, you know. But it comes back to this, is the issue really about the core issue is that IS researchers oversimplify empirical complexity, misapplied theory or applied theory of questionable appropriateness, offer limited or uninteresting findings or conclusions. So, is this relevant to design science research? To the traditional qualitative research that's in BIS discipline, and even quant?
Research.
Yeah. So how do we address this? Right.
So there was, like I missed the talk on big data, but there's, because a lot of people are pushing that, we don't need an explanation, we have the patterns, and we'll follow the patterns and require it. You know, that's, if you want to indulge yourselves with all that stuff, that's totally fine. There's, I always love the example of the shark attacks and ice cream sales. We've talked about this before, right?
Yeah.
You guys have heard that before?
Yeah.
Shark attacks, a really good way to predict them is ice cream sales.
Oh, sorry.
Which is interesting because it's summertime, so people eat more ice cream, people swim more, whatever. But the point is that you get these correlations, I think, coming through very neatly that can lead. We as human beings tend to assign causation. When we see things correlate, when we hear people who eat more tomatoes tend to have less of these diseases, we tend to think, oh, okay, well then eating less or more of those tomatoes must be good then, because it must do. Whereas the reality is that there are a lot of different reasons why those could both be symptomatic of something else, and we need to drill into that a little bit more. I think the reason why it's important is that to be relevant, we have to tell people what to do if they want something to happen. And for us to be able to say that, we need causality. We need to be able to say this causes that. And I think for that we need an explanation, because I think patterns in and of themselves don't mean anything. You know, one thing tends to increase or decrease with another, right? Cool. You know, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to action. As to whether research is doing a good enough job, I think it's the nature of academics to be self-critical. As you said, all those things.
And the whole theme, I suppose, in particularly the papers, Gleasure and Rashidi, and that the big theme leading up to the 2013 Gregor and Hebner paper I can see coming out of it is a yearning from the design science research community for practical application. Don't give me, we've developed the theory, we've spoken about theory now for so many years. Let's see practical instantiations. Tell us about your artifacts so that we can see if our theory is right, you know, or test our theory that way. So it very much seems to be a core thing that's coming out of the literature is this yearning for the practical application of it. And, you know, there's this almost, oh, you're bringing us new theory, are you, in this area? Yeah, well, thanks. I suppose that's the other end of the spectrum.
So where does big data fit into all of this? Do we dismiss it?
I think Rob's point's interesting. I mean, we have these correlations, we have causality, but do we really understand the phenomenon that's there? And that's the role that theory can play a role there.
Like, just to be clear, I suppose big data is fantastic as a way of testing an analysis or generating an analysis, but not as a substitute for analysis. That's my perspective.
What do you think, Jed?
Good end. I really think we're in a very interesting time where I think there are changes allowed now and happening in IS thinking. I know that it's kind of heresy what we were saying, that theory is defunct now. It's no longer. But I think that they both need to sit together somehow. And I don't think we've evolved enough yet in our thinking to work out how they sit together. But there definitely is something in it, that data does replace some of the theorizing. And I'm just an amateur at this at the moment. I'm still reading myself and I'm still developing my own thoughts on it. But I definitely think that the two, theory and kind of correlations in big data, I think that they can all sit together somewhere. I don't think anybody's really kind of defined how they do that just yet. Big data is relatively new. And I think as we move forward, there'll be lots of very interesting PhDs in the coming years about how they can sit together. So
I think that's a good point, but I don't think big data is new. Okay, we talk about this. We will talk about this. Economists have been doing large econometric models on serious data sets for a long time. So it's not like this big data in a commercial sense and an available sense has changed. Now, what does that change? I think I'm reminded of one of the earliest visualization stories is given is when the doctor discovered that cholera was related to poor waters. Okay, so essentially what he did is he essentially put these dots of where, in London, of where people died. And then essentially you look at this on a map and you see, well, actually, there's a water pump from which most of these houses fed. And that's where we got to it. So again, it comes back to your point. What you have is that big data gives you an awful lot of data. What you don't have is cause and effect. But what you do have is the ability to manipulate the cause and effect. And what we're missing in big data is what Google and others are doing is they're putting up, they're doing psychological tests in terms of A/B tests, and they can do it in 7 seconds. So they can essentially put up an A test and a B test in terms of seeing whether this is better in terms of click-through rates or whatever else rates, and they have a randomized sample and they have their answer. So I think it is going to revolutionize because the difference it makes is we're not talking about a sample anymore, we're talking about the population. So we have to get our heads around the fact that that's not possible. So we're no longer in the lab. We're in the field with the ability to do lab experiments. That's what real-time big data gives you. And we have to change our mindings there. What I don't accept is going back to the point. We will always have, if you go from A to A causes B, you've moved to a theory. You're no longer theory non-existent. You've actually stipulated that this causes this. How do you test it? You do essentially what I'm saying, an A and a B test, using the data, and then you confirm. So I think it's different, but we will never be without theory. The reason we'll never be without theory as individuals, if you look at all of the top psychologists, like we all have huge amounts of theory as to how the world works going around in our head. It's part of the human condition. We can't operate without it at a human level. We're mind at a scientific level.
Or are you worried about your future as academics, that big data will replace our role in theorizing?
No, I think it's a huge opportunity. I think what we're getting to is we're getting to a level of complexity that we have never. The phrase I hate is it's all academic. And we've surrendered that ground because, and go back to the stuff on design theory, what they're saying is what we don't have is enough theorizing on why something happened. We've gone out there and we've worked this out and it works. And then somebody says, well, can I replicate it? Don't know. Don't know how it works, don't know why it works. This is where you end up back in theory to some extent. And we have all of those in terms of, business are in the day-to-day business of running. And they're running fast, they're running hard, and they don't have time to come to an abstracted level of how these things work. What a good academic can do is bring that level of abstraction. It's difficult to do. What does it require? The more I kind of get older and less wise is it requires an awful lot of reading. And where is the real value? It'll be in the multidiscipline. It won't be in the individual discipline, because the individual discipline, anybody can, to some extent, get to a level of knowledge.
I might add to that, so I completely agree, but I think one area why being involved in a design project is so important is that trying to reflect on that finished artifact and say why it works is not necessarily where an academic strength. Being involved along the way at each of those different paths where you choose, do we go left here, go right, and being able to break that down and be able to say, okay, well, the thing works, and at the full level level, this idea that it encapsulates works, because we tested it, because as we were building it, we figured out this bit flow. So I think in a way, watching things, you watch these finished artifacts and you're trying to pull it back to literature and all these different things. Being involved in it and being able to stratify what happened and being able to theorize within those different.
Well, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you in that sense, it's the sense of being able to be in the practical and coming to helicopter view concurrently. And you can't come to it unless you have the knowledge and capabilities of helicopter view. And that's what an academic, in the true sense, will bring. I think I'd be more concerned not about our research, I'd be more concerned about our impact on students in terms of thought and how we teach. Because if you want to actually look in terms of, and this point is made by Watson and other people, one thing we haven't done, in a sense, is revolutionize education with ICT and IS at a real level. We've done it which is a new prototype, but at a fundamental level, we haven't done it. That's where, if I was an academic, I'd be more concerned as to where the questions will arise, rather than the research will be a secondary component. I think the bigger question is, will universities exist in the form that they exist in 50 years' time?
And do you think they will?
No. I think they will change slowly. But, I think Christensen's Innovative University book is interesting, because he essentially takes the whole argument, his whole argument against universities. Look at MOOCs now. I mean, you now have essentially $75 to do a particular project on big data, $375 to do a full course on big data from Duke. We currently believe, as a society, that the imprimatur of a degree is an imprimatur of quality. If we find substitute measures for that imprimatur of quality, then will people need a degree?
So we think we know who your master is.
See, I'm really interested in what he's saying, and I agree for the most part with what he's saying. But where I'm coming at is, I think what's changed fundamentally is the lens. Willie said it there, big data, it's not new, it's been around for ages. Yes, it has. But there's only been a very small community of people looking at it for the last kind of 20 years or whatever, 50 years, whatever it is, right? Now, with mobile technology, we're all part of big data. We all have access to big data. We're all reporters. We're all journalists. Everybody, because we're posting pictures, comments, whatever, to social media. So the lens has changed. I think that's the correct terminology.
I'd say, Jay, it's not the lens has changed. It's the fact that now it used to be the data is now down to the individual because of mobile, and there are multiple points. So you now have a very different data picture than we had 5 years ago. So I'd echo your point. I think mobile and smartphones and big data is probably the core area, because it will bring you to the individual level of analysis. Sorry, go on.
I agree. Finally.
So, does anyone else have any comments you want to add to the papers or to Rob's talk?
I think Mark's papers, all the papers, was, to me, put forward in terms of concern within the discipline in terms of how we view theory and theoretical contribution is, in fact, quite wrong, especially when it goes, for example, when he's reviewing the paper and he disagreed with some of the feedback he got from some of the researchers. Sorry. And but also, gave some sort of suggestions in terms of how we can widen the discussion. I think that the way we look at theory is too narrowly focused, per se, and that's part of the problem. And that's driving these kind of behaviors, which you say the core issue. the core issues that IS research will simplify. Well, they do that for many different reasons, but I mean, who's the master in this whole discussion? The objective is to get published, therefore you have a framework that you have to comply with, per se. But the concern within that framework is the people who say manage decision-making process are looking at this too narrowly and fundamentally don't agree among themselves on what really is. And that is a concern, a huge concern, especially for people, who are trying to embark on PhDs or in the process of doing a PhD. And, theory as a solution, theory as a problem is an interesting way of enlarging that discussion. And I think there's a lot of merit in that article.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll be too quick to judge on big data, for example. Design science went through the similar judgment of is always dismissed.
If I were to take a different angle on that and trying to pull back to this view from designing, or trying to pull towards this idea of designing academics rather than explaining academics, I would say that possibly the way that these two discussions meet is that a design science perspective on big data wouldn't be, it would take that, what it's doing and why and the different things, but it would actually maybe tilt more towards so if we have this capability of making a change and watching the impact, and we have access to the whole sample, and we have responsive systems, we have this set of capabilities, and so now what do we actually want to do? What do we want to get out of big data? What is it a tool towards? What are we really trying to do? Are we trying to design what kind of systems towards what end? Because I think that's maybe the point that big data is floating around a little bit. For a lot of people have a lot of data and they're not running big data analyses on it because they don't know why they would. Why, I think. So I think maybe the big data thing, from that point of view, to take a slightly different, again, to try and tie the two together, would be to say, okay, that's great. I think we're starting to understand what big data is and what it does and what it gives us. So now what? What do we want to do? What do we want to build? And if we can, because again, the people who are using these things, Google's and the interesting thing on Airbnb, changing an icon and noticing click-throughs going up 30% and then making sense, they changed from a star to a heart. And people seem to love it, and it created this ripple-through effect that there was an aspirational element to what was happening, but maybe they didn't, and this reflection and everything else, and that's fine. But they're ahead of us as academics in that space now. We're still talking about what big data is. And I think maybe that's, again, to try and tie the two together, to maybe take a more proactive, what can we use big data for, is probably fitting the academic role back in.
I would agree. I think it comes back and there are people working with big data who can bring real, can change a star to a heart in a real system. The question ultimately is, what's the problem? If you don't know why you're changing the star to a heart, you're no better off having done it. Do you know what I mean? Yes, there is an argument in your case, it's an emotional attachment. In your case, that's a theory. Because it's just essentially you're seeing numbers move. Nobody's talking to the person in terms of saying, and could they articulate it even if they wanted to. Okay, so to come back to why do design theory, and I think Michael's point as well, this is a power struggle. Okay, design theory spent probably 6 to 8 years in the wilderness looking for legitimacy. Okay, so when it was first mentioned, serious problem with legitimacy. It's now, I could take a different view. So the reason they want the artifact in there is because they're looking for legitimacy of the design theory within this to change the actual output. I think it's interesting if you look at it that most of the papers that Shirley, Gregor, and Hafner refer to are actually studies from the 70s and 80s. They're DSS studies. So back then, Arizona could produce, and they did, and I was in it, a massive group city support system, very expensive, funded by the military. And that's now one of the exemplars of design science. Okay, so it's not that we weren't doing it, it's somewhere along the way we came for legitimacy for theory, which is the same argument you have in business schools. The business schools have gone very theory heavy because they were accused of being armchair academics with no theory or correspondence behind it. So we've now so far in the pendulum that everything has to have a theory, which has very little relevance. This is an attempt to bring this back, but it's interesting. It's fighting within its own discipline for legitimacy. which again comes back to Michael's point to some extent, the legitimacy is, what do the top journals publish? Because, some of you have traveled, but if you're on the tenure track in the States, I mean, I've seen people, literally, who, on the basis of a journal through review, whether it makes it or not, determines whether they're tenured or not. So it's not an academic debate, to use that word. It's a very real, absolutely substantive issue. So it's governed by what is it? I mean, I design science wouldn't have been an area I would have been in. Enjoy reading papers. I think it's a great movement back. I think it's great that some of the leaders in the field are now pioneering that back. But it's probably actually more difficult to do because you now have a higher level of actually writing down how, why, what, when, where. And the more you do that, the more you're open to questions as to whether you got it right or wrong. But to me, it's powerful. It's politics within a discipline you play there, plain and simple. But that's my view. People can contradict that.
Would anybody agree or disagree? But I think you're right in the sense that it's a power struggle, really. Like, I suppose the qualitative approach bias research was crucified by the positivists, for example. And now that's one.
But that's an American versus European model.
Yeah.
It's not alone to bias in fairness.
Yeah. And then it swung over to let's hammer home the inadequacies of design science. And now it looks like we're swinging over to big data. And I think it does go back to Jed's point that we need to find where it fits, rather than just.
Yeah, but extract the papers are talking about design science becoming, the seminal paper is 2004. Yet the papers they refer to as being design science of the 1970s. There's an inherent contradiction. What it has tried to do is legitimize by giving it a name what was already happening, which got lost. So I'm not sure the power struggle is over in terms of legitimacy, actually.
Yeah.
Just to cut in there as well, because I think the legitimacy argument, a big part of that is becoming having a powerful case, having a big company, having a company that can really do things and see what happens. And again, it's probably the same, just to bring it back to the point about trying to manage these commercial projects, probably nesting academic activities, again, within serious companies and balancing their agenda and all these sort of things to really do us, really get access to all that stuff as well. It's kind of, again, the related challenge.
If you were cynical, you could say as well too that there's a marriage of convenience. It'd be unfair to say it, I would think personally, but it was convenient that in the mid-2000s, the theory papers, Shirley Gregor's 2006 paper, or the 2007 design theory paper, and then suddenly we have the 2013 paper, which is design science research, how you can make a contribution with the theory end viewed on. It's as if design theory and design science research processes had a marriage somewhere through the mid-2000s. And now the area is more unified, or is supposed to be more unified. So it's convenient that the two areas are married into this unified goal. I suppose for power reasons that might be true. If you're cynical, you'd probably say that.
Yeah. But what made design science legitimate was because it got published in MISQ.
It had a long, there was a long gestation period. I remember the conversations at ESAs and this kind of stuff, looking for legitimacy. It spent a long time looking for any level of legitimacy. It finally got some level of recognition, so they referred in 2004. But it's not a debate I followed, but I remember the discussions about it way back then in terms of, it was almost then, would we ever get it to be recognized? So, but we can, again, come back to the bigger principle here. The bigger principle is, how do you do some level of research that you can theorize on, that you can have interesting findings? That's ultimately what we're about. How you do it is horses for courses and what works best. And people have different innate abilities. Some people are better in the design science space, and others are not. I think what's interesting in all of them is they come back to the situation is, what's the problem? What are you trying to solve? And after you've solved it, is it novel or is it new? And that's either a practical implication, which is some sense of design science, or it's a theory contribution. I'm not saying the two are mutually exclusive, but they come back to the same issue. You know, you have to know what you want to get out of it. And then, which brings it back to the deductive and inductive. The other side of it is, which is design science, you know, there is good theory developed out of induction. Actually understanding the mess. What's great about IS is that essentially it deals with the technology and the people. Once you deal with people, you deal with mess. I mean, that's inherent in the human condition. So if you can make sense of that, that's where your contribution is.
I do think the qualitative research really actually does make sense of the mess. Because one of the arguments for design science is that it's ideally suited to messy problems or wicked problems.
I think you're back to, you know, if you want to go back to the 18th century when we went to Enlightenment and we went to the scientific method. If we were back in 16th century, you know, Venice, we would have all been about art and aesthetics. For 200 years, we have allowed the scientific method to be, and you see it in, you know, we talk about it here, but it's all over popular debate. The way for Ireland to progress is through STEM. Okay, so it's not just at the level here, but we have accepted as a method that the scientific method is the way forward. If you reject that paradigm or nuance it, then you would say qualitative research has an awful lot of merit because nothing is replicable. So you can't. So one of the key points of the scientific method is that you can replicate and replicate. You can take an argument that you cannot replicate anything that has anything to do with human interaction. If you could, Ireland would have won the World Cup. I mean, it's that simple. You could replicate the winning strategy of 15 people on a team that is better than someone else. It takes out all variability of leaders on the field, of reacting to chance, reacting to the fact that conditions are different. You know, science doesn't have to deal with any of that in a test tube situation, but it's confined. So if you accept the paradigm out, then you accept the quantitative method, the correct way to go. If you reject the paradigm, then you start to question, you would actually say the qualitative may be the best, because there is no definitive answer to anything. There are only illuminations. Does that answer your question?
Does it? Yeah. I see Colin McGreen there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All have the purpose. I'm not saying that the quantitative doesn't have its purpose, but we give it too much credence is my point. In the IS journals, and all of America in particular, American journals, provided it with too much credence. But if you actually stand back and look at it and ask for any quantitative paper, what is the contribution in a bigger context? It's one variable number.
There's probably, as part of that debate as well, there's a different attitude to theorizing. I use both methods, so I have no preference. But I would say that the quantitative method of theorizing is usually a little bit more modular, whereas the qualitative method is a little bit more adding another thing and swirling it and seeing what it looks like now. And you even see that the way qualitative papers are written, they often overlap quite a lot with one another. Whereas if you look at the journals that come from a really strong quantitative background, there's often almost a section in the paper that says, okay, this is the new bit. And it's really, really clear, and then they have models and they plug in new bits.
Yeah.
And it's a different way of theorizing. It's not just about the data, it's a different attitude to doing things. Are we assembling something, building really clearly cumulatively on this body of knowledge? Or are we realizing, you say, new insights and trying to incorporate them and reconsider things as far as those reconsiderations take us? So again, it's, as part of that, I think the qualitative, quantitative thing doesn't really impact on whether, are you designed to be quantitative or qualitative, depending on what kind of, whether your design is a whole new complex thing or whether you're trying to add a specific bit to another ongoing sort of meta artifact type thing. But again, it's a...
Would you suggest, therefore, that it's best in research to have a combination of both?
No.
No,
Why
yeah.
not?
It is when you're, I mean, basically I've done both. I'm comfortable pretty much in both. My PhD was actually both. I couldn't get both published together. They're published as separate pieces of work. Okay, because it's too much to publish in one piece of work. It's hard to do it. particularly if both are important components. One gets degraded to being the pilot or the start of it, rather than the, so I'm a pragmatist, which is when you're doing a PhD, you're essentially risk averse. Okay, and that's if I'm working with PhD students to some extent, you can be more risky when you're the other side of the letters and you come. So it's doable, but one of them has to be the lead and the other has to be the subordinate.
Yes,
One is at PhD level.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to be very clear that one is essentially setting up the second. It's very dangerous to try and go with two as equal.
Sure.
Because you may not
But
have
is
enough.
it better to do that, even a small bit of the,
Yes, if it doesn't take too much time, but
because it would make it more realistic, more practical, the end,
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to get at.
So, but very quickly, just to add to that, the thing that I think sometimes with a PhD is you have a certain amount of time and effort. If you spend more time doing a whole extra data gathering cycle, that comes from somewhere. So I think an awful lot of the time, multi-method studies are actually theoretically, they really solidly test something, but that thing is smaller because it has to be, because it's just not, you can't just do more. So, sorry, yeah.
I guess it probably goes back to something Willie said a bit earlier on, and we would have talked about in our meeting this morning as well. It completely depends. It's all about the problem. And well, first of all, the problem. So if we look at the rejection reasons behind most journal papers in the basket journals, I'm not saying that's the best metric, but it's a popular one that people go for. There's a lot of papers rejected because they oversimplify things, or they misapply theory, or tell you a question of appropriateness, or a method. They misapply the method, or it's a method of question of appropriateness, and they don't interesting findings. But the most fundamental one always is the problem and the motivation. And everything, every single line, like I was saying before, and Tom laminated his research objectives and kept them over his desk. Every line you write in the PhD or a paper should be done because of that problem. So if you think, that's the first thing. The second thing is real estate. So you don't write up a huge section or do a huge qualitative study just because another paper did it in the same journal. You do it if it's valuable real estate. So you might find, for your particular one, you can do a fantastic high-impact study through purely qualitative means or quantitative, or maybe combine both. And like Willie said, it's very hard to do 50-50. You might go 90-10, depending on where the biggest bang for the buck. So you might say to 10, like you might do a very quick. If people don't know a lot about how big data is being used, you might do a very light qualitative, semi-structured interviews at the start to really set out what are the big things out there. And then use your big impact 90% study, quantitative study, to really talk about the impact of those things. Now, you could have gone the other way. You could have gone 90 qualitative and 10 quant. But would you, for that extra 80% effort, would you have really found out more, and was it worth 9 times the effort? So if you can, it depends on the problem. But you should have the one thing I think most papers are rejected, because number one, the problem isn't clear or the problem isn't new that you're trying to solve. And number two, then you didn't adhere to that, solving that problem all the way through. You stated a great problem, you motivated really well, and then you use a methodology that doesn't fit, or you combine two for no reason, only that it looked like you were trying to tick the box and do it.
You know, my preference is quantitative because I think it leads less to subjective, interpretation that I'd be afraid would happen with the other side. But I thought that it might have been necessary to have a little bit of qualitative just to make the picture better.
I'd echo Kieran's point.
Yeah.
Start with the problem and then ask yourself, how do I improve the validity of this?
Okay.
And if the validity of this, we don't know the problem well enough, which is what Kieran said, we don't know what the variables are in big data. So you improve the external validity by going out and getting the constructs, which you then test. That's a very clear sense of improving the validity of what you're going after. The alternative is if what the problem you're addressing is already very well structured. Why would you go to qualitative? You may go to quantitative, which is where I ended up, but you then go, I was interested in networks, so I went to qualitative after quantitative. Because what I had was I had a sense of how these numbers work, but I didn't have the story of why these numbers worked.
Yes.
So it's an unusual way, but it can be done. Validity. If it doesn't add to your validity to some extent, then it's again, which comes back to Kieran's. You define the problem. How do you solve it with the most validity and reliability possible? Because that's ultimately on a scientific basis where it will be judged.
The there's one other aspect to the PhD and publications. A lot of external examiners for PhD and reviewers of journal papers, some of them do have, in fact, quite a few of them have a preference, but actually a good reviewer or a good extern shouldn't let their preference influence things. But what they should do, and often do, is they check for biases in your preferences. So it sounded, now I don't know what your research problem is, but it sounded like, I'm not sure I trust the qualitative stuff, so I do quant. So I would say both quantitative and qualitative research have a huge number of limitations and a huge number of pros. So the exam, if it appears even under the surface that you did a PhD and you went quant because fundamentally you didn't, okay, the problem would have led itself towards qualitative study, but you didn't like it. That's not good. You won't be tested as being an expert in both. You couldn't be with a PhD, but you should have the authority to review the methodologies, solve the problem. This is my problem. I've reviewed the methodologies, and this is the best one because it's the most appropriate one to solve this problem. Because I like it or don't, even though that might be there in the service. And then you go through, and so the examiner, I guess, PhD is training for research. So an examiner will be thinking, if you take on a PhD student after you're done, would you be kind of letting them down a certain way, even though the method didn't work, just because you like that and you don't trust the other? They'd like to get confidence that you'd be open, even if you're not an expert in particular science, that you take on a PhD and you'd be comfortable guiding them in either direction and being honest and letting them pick a problem or pick a method to suit the problem that suits them. So removing your own biases, whatever, and being problem-oriented in methodology, in theory, questionable theory, and all that's definitely true. The theory shouldn't be there because it was cool and you liked it. That's part of it, but it's because it was the best theory out there to solve the particular problem we're trying to solve.
Thanks, Kieran. I see a lot of people agreeing with Kieran, so I think this is a good way to finish up on a positive note.
It's a very good one.
But before we wrap it up, I just want to thank Rob for coming up and spending his time with us. And here's a small token here, Rob. I know you didn't come with a tie, so we have a nice NUI tie that you can bring. And unfortunately, it's not the Late Late Show, so there's not one for everyone in the audience. But there is for each speaker here onwards, and also for Trevor and Noel, we've got ties for you as well. So we're going to see you next week. So that's it, and thank you very much.